Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. A little bit impromptu, a little bit of live feed update timing. I'm live here on Twitch. I will be live on YouTube in a second. I decided to try something, which is that if you're watching the video back on YouTube, you kind of don't want the intro screen and the preamble. That's not really what you go to YouTube for. So I figured maybe I'd start the YouTube stream. Once I actually start talking about the subject, which will be very shortly. We're here to talk about the Traitors. People have been asking me my thoughts all season, and I've not really, I don't want to spoil things, and season it wasn't over yet. Didn't have fully formed thoughts yet. Warwick, thank you for the 69th month, tier 3. Appreciate that. Talking news items. I've thought about that, Christian. I've thought about like when a Big Brother season ends, just keep going live in the morning and just instead talk about anything. I don't know if that would be great for my my sleep schedule, but the price of aluminum, yeah. Thank you, Seth. So yes, we're gonna be talking spoilers for the Traitors. I'm gonna turn on the YouTube stream very shortly, and then we'll get straight into it. That's the plan. All right. Hello, YouTube. We should be live now on YouTube as well. We are here to talk about the Traitors season 3 here in the US. The finale aired last night when I'm streaming here, and got to talk about it. Got to talk about the Traitors season 3. I've had many opinions on the Traitors in the past. Many of them are still the case, but the Traitors keeps casting Big Brother legends, and I am the Big Brother guy, and I have lots of thoughts on especially the Big Brother cast on this season, amongst other things. So I will be spoiling all of the Traitors season 3. So be prepared for that. But if you have any questions, if you're watching live, feel free to ask and we'll discuss the Traitors. That is the current plan for the stream today. So let's talk about it. Spoilers. What a disappointing ending, right? I feel like there's still like a couple of main problems with the game format. One has been talked to death. There's very little incentive to actually hunt traitors on the show. They are constantly having to hide the fact that their game incentives don't line up with the show incentives. So for instance, ultimately you could probably say, and it's hard to know for sure because even in the reunion, they're clearly not really allowed to talk about things in the way that they should. But like Dylan, to me, seemed to have the correct strategy for a faithful, which is buddy up to the people you think are traitors and then vote them out at the end. But because they don't, for whatever reason, let you really have that strategy publicly, what we got was this constant back and forth of Dylan being like, oh man, I really trust this person. I really trust them. I really trust them. And then at the last moment being like, I'm sure that they're a traitor though. Oh, it sucks. Oh, I just changed my mind at the last second. Oh man. But they are definitely a traitor. But I trusted them so much, but I'm definitely voting them out. And it is just silly. It's just silly that we have to go through that. Um, like I think it's so much personally. I think it's so much more interesting if you are following Dylan and he's like, yeah, so I'm pretty sure that Danielle is a traitor, or I'm pretty sure that Boston Rob is a traitor. But that's good. That's good for me. All I have to do is tell them that I trust them. The same thing goes with Brittany, right? Like Brittany was very convinced, I think, that Danielle was a traitor. You see this moment from Brittany, and there's lots to say about Brittany, but there's this moment from Brittany where she is talking to Danielle and she's like, "Oh man, I just trust you so much. It's just the best." And she's so clearly manipulating Danielle in that moment because she knows Danielle is a traitor. But like what it appears to be on the show is her just actually believing in Danielle and trusting Danielle. And that's just not what's happening, you know? So it's very frustrating. I find that part of the show very frustrating. I feel like at the very least, you got to give us what's actually happening. Stop trying to hide things. Now, who am I to say? The Traitors is doing fine. For as much as people seem to complain about the show, and this is the thing too about the Traitors, is that it has certainly gone mainstream. It is a very popular and successful show. I find people in the real world who will talk to me about the Traitors. Who'll be like, "Oh, do you watch the Traitors?" But what's interesting is I talk to those real people in real life, and they have an issue with how it's structured. They're like, the game makes no sense. Like if random people off the street are annoyed about this, then there's a serious problem. Because when you watch Big Brother, I have a lot of complaints about the structure of Big Brother. But when you watch Big Brother, you go to the casuals, they're gonna be like, yeah, competitions are fine. I like it when they get slimed. You know what I mean? Battle of the Block? Yeah, it was great. Did you see how Nicole went out when she won HOH and then got dethroned? Oh my God, that was wild. You know what I mean? But with the Traitors, they genuinely like, yeah, the ending is kind of boring and it doesn't really make any sense. And most people would also say the competitions suck. They make no sense. Now they have improved the competitions, but not significantly so. And they're in this weird spot where they go to this finale, and I mean right away what's happening. I mean they did their best to try to hide it, but like it was pretty clear that Brittany was going to be voted out, and then as soon as Brittany's voted out, the game's over. There's no real tension left. They tried to make the tension like, oh, but are they going to vote out Dylan now? But the reality is there was no tension left. And the fact that there was still a competition that they had to do, it was wild that we sat through what felt like 20 minutes of a competition after the game had basically ended already. So, that was weird. So there's still plenty, I think, to sort of like work around in that regard. Yeah. In addition to that, the editing was just so strange, right? Like, I don't think anybody, given the edit that Danielle Reyes got that season, could have thought that she had any chance in hell at winning. Like, from basically episode 1, it was telegraphed to us that Danielle Reyes is not winning this season. For her to be the final traitor, the last standing traitor, and I get that Brittany ends up as the final traitor technically, but the second Danielle leaves, Brittany's screwed, and everybody knows it. And Brittany was a traitor for like 1 episode. For Danielle to be basically like going into the finale, she either stays and wins or leaves and the traitors lose. It's like, well, you know they're losing. What do you mean? You know they're losing. It's so weird. And like it's also this situation where like you have in the reunion, there like the other cast members are having to defend her. Like, yeah, she was great at manipulating us. We were snowed. And meanwhile, like all season long, the most popular thing I see in discussion about the season is, oh, Danielle is such a bad actress. She's the worst traitor I've ever seen. What an awful player. Like, what is happening here? I just don't get it. Like, here's what I think they were doing. What I think they were doing was they were basically editing, because it was a very, lame duck finale. It feels to me like they edited the season as slanted as possible to make the finale as interesting as possible. I think this is what they deemed to be the most interesting way to portray the finale. And what I mean by that is a couple of things. They tried to make everybody root against Danielle, so that when Danielle loses, you're kind of like, ooh, thank God. And when Danielle loses by the hand of Brittany, you're not mad at Brittany, right? You're not mad at Brittany, but you're also not like that pressed about her winning as a traitor. So you're kind of still like able to root for Brittany to maybe get a couple of rounds through, but you're not like, like, oh, screw Brittany. Because imagine the world where Danielle Reyes was built up all season long as the master manipulator strategist, which you absolutely could have done, 1,000%. I mean, I think an example of this is look at the reunion and the way that was edited. The reunion is edited pretty sloppily, right? You're watching the reunion and conversations are it's like so choppy, right? Like it's just constantly cutting around and you're like, what? Why? I'm missing so much of this conversation. It's something you probably noticed if you watch if you watch the reunion, but that happens constantly during the episodes too. It's just hidden better because there's more coverage and there's music and there's montages and there's like, there's a camera on every face, so you can so much more easily chop things up without people noticing. So like an example is one of the more jarring ones, I thought, beyond just like the cutting in the and confessionals, of course, beyond just the cutting of the argument, but like there's this moment in the reunion where Carolyn is asked, do you think Danielle respected you? And she starts tearing up just at the question before even saying a word. She starts tearing up at the answer. They cut to commercial. They come back and they replay the question. And it turns out that's not what happened. She answered the question and then partway through the answer started tearing up, right? But you never would have known that. You would have thought if they hadn't replayed it in a different way, you would have thought that she immediately teared up just at the asking of the question. Now, in this particular instance, it doesn't really matter, but I think it's a great example of just how easily you can edit things to be completely different to the way that they were in reality. And so I say that to try to describe, and I know that most of you know this, but like, you can edit people kind of however you want. You like when you are in that editing room, especially in a show like The Traitors, you are picking and choosing who are my heroes, who are my villains, who do I want the audience to root for, who do I want them to root against. Now, sometimes it can be difficult, but you know, for the most part, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So they very much actively chose for Danielle to be somebody that you rooted against. And they could have, if they wanted to, very easily. Danielle, a beloved figure in the Big Brother community, makes an incredibly deep run in the Traitors, basically comes like close to a coin flip away from winning. You could so easily make her look like an absolute genius, right? Who gets screwed because of Brittany's incompetence, right? Like you could easily write that story in the edit room. Is that a true story? I don't know. I don't know what happened on the show. It certainly seems like it could have been. And I think that's a more compelling story personally, because I think you go into the finale thinking that Danielle probably won. And then, you know, Brittany actually flipping her vote. You're like, that is unbelievable, especially given their history. And maybe that's maybe that's even more disappointing. But here's my thing. I would so much rather be heartbroken. Like, oh my God, I thought Danielle was going to win. She played this masterful game and got screwed over by Brittany, of all people, again. And feel something. Feel like, oh my God, what a disaster. Than what I felt at this finale, which was a whole lot of just like nothing, right? Like a whole lot of just like, oh, now they're just gonna end it with 4 of them. Okay, I guess each of them get a cool 50K. Like, okay. Which it does not help. It does not help me, who has in the past tried to watch Traitors seasons, and then as soon as like the entertaining people leave, I'm just kind of like, what am I watching this for? Like the game, I think for me, it is so clearly about the cast. And if you lose the cast, you lose the show. And that's part of why their meta is so predictable, because this is another issue I think that the Traitors has. The meta game is far, far, far too predictable. There's going to be a Survivor Traitor. Very, very high chances there's going to be a Survivor Traitor. Very high chances there's going to be a Big Brother Traitor. And then there's probably going to be one more, right? Like that has been the formula. And so you have to say like, okay, they have to change up the formula, right? Like they have to change it so that it's not so predictable. Here's the problem with changing the formula. The formula is why the show works. Right? The formula is equally why the show works and why the show is so beatable. Because the game is broken, but more specifically, the Traitors can't be working together the whole time it's too overpowered. You want a mixture of traitors that will target each other. You need gamers as traitors who will target each other. You need gamers as traitors who are from different shows who will eventually target each other. Otherwise, you run the risk of them just running the table and it being really boring. Traitor on traitor violence is, I think, the beating heart of the traitors. It is the thing that makes the show more interesting. If you don't have that, the show is much more boring. Then number 2, if you don't make a Big Brother or a Survivor a traitor, they're just gonna get killed. They're just all gonna get killed. Right? They should be, at least. Again, this is how the game incentivizes things. If there is no Big Brother player to protect the other Big Brother players, then you should just kill all of the Big Brother players. Because they will not necessarily work together, but they are still gamers. They are going to be like working hard to build relationships and alliances. And you should just kill them all. And so what happens if you get together this all-star cast of Big Brother Survivor players, none of them are traitors, and then they all just get killed off in the first few episodes? You don't have a show again. So you have to make at least one of them a traitor, right? But if you have to make at least one of them a traitor, then it becomes very predictable that at least one of them is traitor. And guess what happens with that? You got to start voting them out. So there's a catch-22. And the show is kind of coasting on the fact that, maybe not coasting, but the show is banking on the fact that the players themselves are not like savvy to this as much. Like basically, over the course of 3 US seasons, the show, the players have gotten much better at figuring this out. And it's getting to the point where it's getting a little dangerous, right? To the point where next season, if you're not just systematically voting out all of the Big Brother Survivor players, you're not doing it right. And the show is just banking on the fact that, like, oh, hopefully they just don't do that. And they kind of do that by casting non-gamers who won't think that way. And so that's kind of like the balance. But then, you know, you cast a Dylan who is, you know, basically like, yeah, I'm going to metagame this. And it becomes a little bit of an issue. So, you know, I don't necessarily think that this will like kill their show anytime soon, primarily because I think between the kinds of people they cast and the interference that they have, the influence they have over the cast, they can probably keep riding this kind of like, you know, we're kind of hoping that they just don't figure this out kind of stuff. But it's definitely an issue that I think should be addressed. What if they begin casting normies instead of reality stars? I think that also kills the show. I think that the show like rides on, again, I think the cast is so key to the show's success. That it just doesn't, I don't think it works because the game format is just not that interesting. Like the show is vibes. The show is vibes and simplicity. And so you can go a long way with that, but you can't, I don't think you can be the mega hit that Traitors US is without the casting it does. It's bringing together the reality television community. Quite frankly, I would not be watching the show if there weren't Big Brother players, if there weren't like familiar faces on the show. In the same way that I wouldn't be watching Deal or No Deal Island if, Dr. Will hadn't been there. You know what I mean? Like, who is watching that show if you don't have established characters from other shows on it? That show is, it's not happening. Now, there would be people who watch The Traitors without it. I am not necessarily the majority there. I think there are people that really like the vibes. I think there are people that like the concept. And there are lots of people who would prefer an all completely new player cast. And I think there's a way to make that work. But again, I think that you have to tweak the formula, tweak the game structure. And I think there's plenty of ways to do that. But you have to do so in a way that is not super confusing. And I say that though, but like the way that they do their show is not not super not confusing. Like this whole thing with the seer, like the seer is another very silly thing that is incredibly gameable in exactly the way that Dylan clearly again knew. They were talking about like, oh, if it's a traitor, they're going to lie and say that the other person is a traitor. No, not unless they're stupid. Like, because of exactly what Dylan then says, which is if they say one of them is a traitor, you vote them both out. 1,000%. It's it's just like it's just a bad thing. It's just always a bad thing. If you are a traitor, the seer is so bad for you because either a good player wins it and potentially picks you and you're screwed, or doesn't pick you and potentially clears a person, or you get it and you get into conflict with someone, they vote you both out, or you clear a person. Either way, somebody's getting relatively cleared. Now, there's some potential benefit if you can like buddy up with that person. I think if you pick a person maybe like Dolores, you can be like, hey, oh my God, you're a faithful, yes. And then you can like try to make it seem like we're both faithfuls, but that's not really what happens. And here's where the seer really breaks, because you could just say it's a check on the traitor's power, but it's also terrible for the faithful. Not the other faithfuls. It's terrible for the faithful that wins it. You don't want to have the seer power. Because if you find the traitor, the other players should vote you out. They vote you and the traitor out. That's what they should do. Because of course, if you find the traitor has to accuse you too. And why take the risk? You just vote both of you out. So you don't want to find the traitor. You just want to clear someone. Okay, now you've cleared someone. Now they're cleared, but you're still not cleared. It literally happened in the UK version. Right, like yeah, like if Brittany had just decided, and this is why it was so, Gabby was just like, thank you for not accusing me. Which was such a giveaway that they were so convinced she was a traitor. She was like, thank you for not screwing me over, Brittany. Thank you for going out quietly. And Brittany, I think at that point was barely even high. She was like, well, I didn't have it in me. It's just their game mechanics are so poorly. I mean, I thought Big Brother's game mechanics can be poorly thought through. The Traitors game mechanics are just not good. Now, what the Traitors does well, the fast pace, the round table, and like I said, the vibes. And I will include, so there's different kinds. There's like story edit, and then there's like um vibes edit, I guess is what I would call it. I was a trained editor, but don't remember all the terms. I think story edit is bad on the Traitors. It's very, I think, predictable and not very satisfying. Like, when have you watched a season of the Traitors that felt super satisfying, at the Traitors US at least, that felt super satisfying, that wasn't satisfying because of like the thing you like? Season 1 was satisfying for me because of the outcome, but if I wasn't attached to the outcome, I would have thought it was really boring because it was it was pretty straightforward, and it was a real what am I looking for? Stomp. It was dominating performance. The best one, a steamroll is what I was looking for. Thank you. The most satisfying, again, most satisfying season I've watched now is the Canadian season 2, and I haven't watched many seasons, but that also had a result that I was really personally invested in. I also thought it was like a fairly fun outcome regardless, but I saw in discussion that people also thought that was a little boring. So story wise, I don't like, but the editing for like day to day vibe stuff is great. The song they're playing at the round table, the camera pan through all the faces, really really good. Like, that is something that I think other reality shows lack fairly significantly. Like, just the drama of it. Reality shows often lean into the sort of trashiness of their format. The Traitors leans into this big, epic, operatic, campy vibe. And I think that's really important for the show. You've seen Survivor head in this direction. I mean, Survivor is always a little bit like that, but Survivor has really leaned into this as well, where they do their best to make their show seem a little more like upscale, as opposed to like that, um, again, like sort of trashier vibe that certainly Big Brother has. Um, And I just think that's so important. It's so fun to watch. And then they do these things. They have such great shots. Like, they very clearly just spend a lot of time focusing on their cinematography and their editing. Um, you have that shot of like Rob when he goes after Bob and he turns his head, and you have the perfect angle of he turns his head straight to Bob right when he says Bob's name. You know, there are just so many good little moments like that. Um, like, that's where the show really shines. Um, I forget where I was going with that, but but that's some good stuff. Another issue I have is the prize money. Um, it's just not high enough, right? That's, I feel like it's just not high enough. Not only have you cast people who are already, for the most part, probably wealthier than your average reality contestant, probably to a fairly significant degree. You're paying them to be there. Here's the thing. I don't know how much they get paid to be on the Traitors. I don't know. I have not asked. I don't, I don't usually dig for those kinds of things too much. But I do know that they get paid well. And quite frankly, I don't think that they get equal pay. on the Traitors. I don't think that's a thing on the Traitors. Um, that's where I was getting at, Brian. There is a very decent chance that every single one of the people who won at the end was paid more to be on the show than they won winning the show. You know? Like, you can sort of see why they were kind of chill with just splitting it 4 ways, right? Like, you can sort of see why they were like, you know what? We don't need to vote anyone else out. We're chill. um, I think that's an issue. I do. I think that, like, especially if you're going to cast a bunch of people who are like not super competitive to begin with, you need to at least give them some other incentive to play harder, I think. Um, you know, another part of I think like the issue with the show's format is that you will basically always get, you know, I don't want to be mean, but like you will almost always get the quote unquote duds of the season making it to the end of the game because they don't get murdered and they don't get voted out because they're obviously faithful and they're completely not, like, they're gullible and they're not threats. And so they don't get murdered, they don't get voted out. And so your end game for the Traitors will almost always be some mixture of like maybe one big strategic player left, maybe more, and then a bunch of, you know, at least one or more of like the quote unquote duds or less interesting cast members, which, you know, I think is also an issue for the show in general. So those are I think some of the things that just continue to stand out to me with the show. It's still like, it still works, which I think is really interesting. And I think again that comes down to the way they edit the show, the vibe, the cast. And I think that given its current status, it's a great way for reality contestants to like get a bit of a bigger profile for themselves. Um, in some is for some people revitalizing their reality television career. For others, just like bolstering it. Um, it's also a show that I would now advise any potential contestant uh, to be very wary because they're very clearly willing to edit you in any way that they want, right? Like, I do not think, I think the Traitors, I think they will treat you well. They will pay you well, they will treat you well. But I don't think you can trust them with how they will edit you. And that's true for most shows. Most shows you can't trust how they'll edit you, and they won't treat you well, and they won't pay you well. Um, but especially from my perspective, coming from like the Big Brother angle, where the producers have probably the least amount of editing power than any show because of the live feeds, and the live component of it. It does certainly stand out to me, especially watching Big Brother players like Danielle get really kind of in some ways screwed by it. In other ways, she was still the main character of the season, but that's mostly due to her performance than how they edited her. And it certainly would have been better for her if they hadn't edited her that way. Clearly, money doesn't trump cast, but it raises. See Mr. Beast, but it raises the stakes. I mean, this is the thing. When I watched Beast Games, it really reminded me of. It was like this is what I will say about Beast Games is Beast Games ultimately offers. It was $5 million. Um, I'm gonna lightly spoil Beast Games for you here. So I apologize if you care. Um, it's not a big spoiler. The prize money and you may have even seen headlines. The prize money becomes $10 million, uh, which is wild. And the cast members of that show largely needed the money, which is part of what makes it like, because it's not like you really want people like it does become icky when it feels a little Squid Gamesy and it feels like, oh, these people need money and now we're watching them fight over it. Um, so, you know, you got to be careful on that side of things too. But what I will say about Beast Games is that it reminded me of when, um, of like the beginning times of reality TV when winning Survivor and winning $1 million felt like absolute life changing money. Like you are now a millionaire. Um, Not really after taxes, but you are now like, that at least at the time felt like generational wealth. Like, but inflation happened, um, and it's still a lot of money. It's still, I think, life changing for a lot of people, but you don't often see it talked about in the same with the same reverence that it used to be. Um, but on Beast Games, it really was like 1 million you can buy a house, not in San Diego. No, sir. Especially not after taxes. 1 million after taxes. You could maybe buy a little shack. um, but anyway, you could feel the weight of that money in the show, and that was, I think, one of the better parts of that of Beast Games. Um, you don't feel the money in the Traitors at all. I don't know. Like, I'd be curious to know. Like, does anybody watching the show keep track of the prize money when you're watching a season? Like, does it matter to you at all? Because I don't. When Alan in the finale was like, "You're gonna win 200 something $1,000," I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, it just feels completely insignificant. Um, it feels to me like like it's your bonus at the end of the year. You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna pay you to be on the show. That's your salary. And then if you do really well, we'll give you a little bonus. And that's the prize money. um and that just feels weird. It feels weird. But okay. I think the other main thing I feel like I need to talk about. Um I love Brittany. Love her. She is, I think, a Hall of Fame confessionalist. Um, I think personally, at her best, when she's not the main character as a confessionalist, when she's just getting some quips in. But she held her own. Love Brittany. And I thought she did a great job of manipulating Danielle into choosing her to be a traitor and not killing her as a traitor. But oh my god. Switching her vote from Ivor to Danielle. I mean, that was a really bad move. That was just I have not seen a worse move on the Traitors. I say that. Literally, Dolores in that very episode voted for Ivor out of nowhere. But like, oh man, there was less than zero reason to make that move. Like, just think about this, right? They were down to, it was the final 6. They were about to vote one person out and get to the final 5. Dolores, despite being, despite not being able to sway her away from Ivor in the moment, is locked in on Danielle. She 1000% believes Danielle is faithful and will not budge from that. Given that is the case, if you survive this vote without Danielle leaving, the two of you have basically won the game. Because you, Danielle, and Dolores have voting power at the final 5. You can do whatever you want. Now, there's a small chance that, Dylan and Gabby try to sway Dolores into voting specifically Brittany out in the following round. And there's nothing that Danielle can do to sway her off of that because she couldn't sway her off of Ivor. But I think that's not a super likely outcome. And we know what happens if Danielle leaves. Brittany's screwed. Anyway, so there's never a reason. There's no benefit to changing her vote here. She gets no credit for it. In fact, I think it makes her look more guilty that she went at Gabby, changed her vote to Ivor because she knew that's where the numbers were, then flipped her vote off of Ivor only because she thought the votes wouldn't be there anymore. I mean, there's a reason they were all so convinced it was Brittany. It was just so obvious that it was Brittany. And it pissed Danielle off to the point where Danielle didn't help the case either. Because Danielle was like, well, Brittany just screwed me over. So I'm not going to help her here. I'm going to be pissed at her. In that one move, she basically, it was like, you can take a coin flip to win this game. Or you can definitely lose this game. And she was like, I will take the loss, please. Just oof. Such a bad move. And to just like think about how different the entire season would have been if she hadn't made that move. Now, in the reunion, she mentioned something, which is, I'm still not like 1,000% sure what was in her head when she made that decision. Because in the show, she's saying, oh, well, Dolores gave a look like she was voting Danielle. And so I thought the votes weren't there. That makes no sense. I'm sorry, it makes no sense. It doesn't matter. If you think Dolores is voting that way, you still vote Ivor. Because voting Ivor is still the better move. Even if Dolores did flip, on the off chance she didn't, it's certainly the better move. Even if she did flip, it's still better for you because it doesn't look as suspicious. So that makes no sense to me, but it's plausible, right? In the moment, you're panicked, whatever. But she also implies that she was suspicious that Danielle would turn on her in the end, in the reunion. Like she was like, there was definitely a thing in the back of my head that you might have betrayed me. And this is where I think you really need to like dig deep into the psychology of Brittany. Because Brittany is a player who on her first season of Big Brother was on the season that the fans dubbed the summer camp season. It was all kumbaya. I mean, there were arguments, but that was mostly because of Rachel Riley. For the most part, outside of Rachel, it was a very kumbaya season. Everyone was just friends, hanging out. She makes it to the final four with her friends. And then she sat down and told, I'm sorry. We've all been playing the game the whole time. We've dragged you here to the final four, but now it's us three bros and you're out. Sorry about that. Massive betrayal. Clearly deep traumatic scars. She's voted out of the final four by her friends. And that's it. She comes back 2 seasons later. This time, battle hardened, ready to play more aggressively, more strategically. She gets into some big alliances. She's making connections. She's got agency. She's holding off players like Janelle, Mike Boogie, and even Dan Giesling himself. She's doing a great job. She sacrifices Dan when Frank keeps winning competitions. Everything's going well until Dan steps out of 24-hour solitary and hosts his own funeral. And then just like that, she goes from being in a winning position to out in the same round because Dan flips on her. Brittany is a player who has had the rug pulled out from under her many times. She is very aware and cautious, I think, of other smart players. So I can see why she would have been a little skeptical about Danielle. Now, here's the thing about Danielle. Danielle is loyal to a fault. I don't think people remember this or recognize this about Danielle. If you are in Danielle's corner, she has you. She would have lost to Jason in the final 2 of Big Brother 3 if she was able to. She, quite frankly, to some small degree, took Lisa over Amy. And they say it's because they were worried about Amy as a competition threat. But I have to imagine that at least part of that was some amount of loyalty to Lisa. She was loyal to James to the end of All Stars. Like, she is deeply loyal. Now, yes, Marcellus would certainly say otherwise. This is the thing. You have to actually be the person she wants to work with. That is true. That is true. But if you are that person, she's got you. I don't think people recognize that about her. And I think also, I guess it is a very salient point that, like, you also need to know that you are the person she is loyal to and not somebody else. But, like, who else would she be? Maybe you would have thought Dolores, but that's not really how she operates. Did I see Lisa's tweet about the Traitors? No. What did she say? So in the reunion, Brittany implies she was worried that Danielle might betray her. I don't think Danielle was going to do that. I really don't. But even if she was, it's still not the move. Um, I really, Lisa was Team Faithfuls. I don't think people know this about Lisa. Um, Lisa has definitely been on record in the past of like being a bit, uh, like salty. I think about um Danielle and Big Brother 3. Um, and not in a serious way, I think. But like it's not like from my perspective seeing Lisa's interviews here and there, it doesn't feel like they're besties. Um, and quite frankly, I feel like if I were Lisa and I was constantly being told I didn't deserve my win because Danielle played better, I might be a little annoyed. um, but anyway, you have to imagine that part of what's happening with Brittany, as she implied in the reunion, is that she not only is thinking Dolores might have flipped, but also I'm worried about Danielle myself. Danielle has Dolores, I don't, right? Um, if I help this go through and we get to like a final three scenario or something along those lines, then like they could vote me out. Danielle could take the solo win. It's a reasonable thought. It's a reasonable thought to have. Should it be influencing her decision in this particular moment? No, I don't think so. Um, so it's hard to know exactly. Like for me, that's sort of like where it seems to land. It was a combination of already being a little nervous about going through that, on top of feeling like Dolores was indicating that she was voting another way, and just making a mistake in the moment. But man, oof. Here's the thing. I felt like obviously the edit was implying that Danielle lost. Um, but I figured after what happened in reindeer games, there's no way Danielle and Brittany would be friendly if Brittany made the call to vote Danielle. And here's my logic behind this. Um, as Brittany explains in the reunion, they had a cumulative like 3 hours of a relationship prior to doing reindeer games. When they played reindeer games, they were aligned. Brittany similarly had to make sort of a split-second decision and chose for Danielle to compete in a competition that Danielle lost and then was eliminated in. The way that competition worked is that each subsequent person would have less time to compete in the challenge. So if you go first, you have the most amount of time to compete. You win it, then you choose who goes next. So you have to make this kind of. It was a very good episode. You have to make this kind of decision between: do I want to choose an ally to go next to give them the most amount of time remaining, or do I want to choose an enemy in the hopes that they fail and the whole thing ends? Because the first person that fails, the competition ends. You might not even need to compete in this thing, right? So, so how this worked was, I think it was like 2 or 3 rounds in, and it was still easy enough that everybody had made it through. And Brittany is in this spot where it's like, okay, I can choose an enemy, but so far everyone's been able to get through it fairly easily. And under most circumstances, the person that Brittany chooses should be able to make it through. And if Brittany chooses somebody else, and they successfully do the challenge. Now, Danielle is one of the few remaining options to compete with even less time. So there's a lot of danger to it. And yes, Brittany had done it really quickly. There like with plenty of time left. So it felt like it was still fairly safe. So like, you know, there's a lot of reason to believe that like maybe she should just pick Danielle. And so she does. And Danielle's pissed. And Danielle, who even in that moment, we played back the tapes, had plenty of time to finish, but like just didn't have the hustle in her. She said since that it was like the shock from the betrayal from Brittany. And she was so upset with Brittany in the moment, which I was like, that makes sense. I would be pissed too in the moment. But afterward, I'd be like, you know what? It was a tough decision. It wasn't really that much of a betrayal. And also, we're playing reindeer games. But that's not what happened. Danielle was pissed even after it aired and beyond. She was like, no, that was a deep betrayal. Which surprised me. You know, especially coming from Danielle, who has had her fair share of betrayals, as Marcellus, as we pointed out, would tell you. Because I didn't feel like it was really that much of a betrayal. I don't think that Brittany intended to betray Danielle in that moment, and she made a reasonable decision, I felt. I would, like, if I was in Danielle's position, I would be mad. I would be upset if my ally accidentally got me out. I'd be annoyed. But after the game ended, you know, it would be a different story. So this is the drama that they came into the game with. That Danielle felt like Brittany betrayed her, and you know that's why they had that thing. So we go through the game. They come back together. They're friends again. They're allies. The idea that Brittany, when they left that cliffhanger, the idea that Brittany would have flipped her vote was like, there's no way. After what happened, this is, in my eyes, way worse than reindeer games. Way worse than reindeer games. Because in reindeer games, it really was like a split-second decision. And there was a lot of reason to believe that by putting Danielle in the competition, she would stay. Right? Like, there was a lot of reason to believe that this was not dooming Danielle to eviction. In fact, there was reason to believe that this was the better thing for Danielle to go earlier rather than later. Flipping your vote and voting her out is dooming her, is damning her to be eliminated for sure. And not only does it doom her, it dooms yourself in the process. I would be so much more upset with Brittany. In fact, I've said this before. I've been on record. If an ally betrays me because it's the smart move, I'll be annoyed in the moment, I'm sure, but I would never hold that against them. Never in a million years. Well, I guess it depends on the relationship. Like if they betray me, they go on to win the game. Like I'll get over it. It's part of the game. If an ally betrays me and it was a stupid move, it was a just flat out bad move and it screwed both of us, that would be hard to get over. That would be hard to get over. Yeah, like MJ betraying Leah. If it's like, if you are betraying your closest ally and it's screwing them over and it screws yourself over, that's how bad the move is. oof, I'm sorry. Like, that's like, I'm not gonna be like, reaming you out on Twitter, but like, we're probably not friends. Like, I don't know why I would want to be your friend. you're you're A, not trustworthy, and B, not smart. You know what I mean? Um and that's the thing too. I think, what it really comes down to is like, can you own it and can you apologize for it? If somebody's like, you know what, I screwed up. I'm so sorry. Like, then yeah, I'm gonna forgive you. But I think here's my theory. I think the vast majority of people that betray their allies and screw themselves over in the process are also the kind of people who are not capable of owning that decision. Um, there are some exceptions, but I think the majority of those people are not. And I think Brittany is that kind of. I think Brittany is perfectly capable of owning that she made a mistake. Um, but me personally, I would be so much more pissed. And given how pissed Danielle was at the other thing, I was like, there's no way she would not be even able to look at Brittany, especially because choosing Brittany to be a traitor was a mistake in the first place. Like, there were much better options to choose people for traitors. She should have chose Dylan. And I think that's what Dylan wanted. He had been angling to be recruited the entire time. The reason he goes after Brittany or goes after Danielle is because he's like, yo, you didn't pick me? This whole time I've been trying to get freaking recruited as a traitor, and you chose Brittany, and you clearly chose somebody other than me. And if it wasn't me, it was probably Brittany, right? If she chooses Dylan, Dylan has much more sway in the game than Brittany does. Dylan's not coming after her. Maybe Brittany's pissed and goes after Danielle, but you can flip that around on Brittany much more easily than you can flip it around on Dylan. It's just flat out the better play to recruit somebody like Dylan or even Gabby. Because those are, again, like, locked in votes. Like, are you getting Brittany, Gabby, and Ivor as a voting block of 3 against Danielle against Dylan, Danielle, and Dolores? Probably not. So recruiting Dylan was just the better play. But Danielle, I think, intentionally chose the less optimal route because she wanted to win the game with Brittany. So from my perspective, it's like, I chose you so we could win together, and then you screw me over like that. I would be so pissed. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like I said, I think Brittany might then turn on Danielle, but again, like, it's just such a better position because even if Brittany knows you're a traitor and she was not recruited, she can come after you all she wants. She doesn't have the social capital to make it stick. And there may still be some hesitancy, like her not wanting to be wrong. Like, would Brittany really go after Danielle hard if she was not recruited? Maybe she would, but would she go 100%? Would she hold back a little bit for fear of being wrong and screwing Danielle over for no reason? I mean, given what happens, maybe she does. But even so, she doesn't have the social capital that Dylan does. I think Danielle wins the game if she recruits Dylan, and I think she knows that. Like, I think she knows that. Murdering Tom was also a mistake, I think. I think that came from the fact that Tom was part of the discussion with Gabby about being suspicious of Danielle, and Dylan was not. So it's like, if you know Tom is already suspicious of you and you think you have a good enough relationship with Dylan that you might be able to sway him, I can understand why they go with Tom there. And you go with Tom over Gabby because of the men versus women thing, which is another way of metagaming. Um, but ultimately, that was a mistake. Tom, again, is somebody just who just didn't have the social. Like, again, you have to think about it this way. Like, honestly, it probably doesn't matter a ton if you think about it. You could kill Dylan, and then it's probably still Gabby and Tom and Ivor working against Danielle in the next round. And Tom is more likely to be swayed, we know, than Dylan is. But if you know Tom is against you and Dylan might not be, there's a reason to, which is why the strategy that Dylan implemented of being buddy buddy with Traitors right up until the point where he voted them out is absolutely the play there. Killing Ivor might have been the play. That's definitely possible. Killing Ivor there could have made some sense as well. But ultimately, I think the bigger mistake was recruiting. I think recruiting Brittany over Dylan was a bigger mistake than killing Tom over Dylan. But again, I think that Danielle willingly took the harder path because she thought she could, and because she wanted to win with Brittany. Yeah, so that's I thought for sure. I was like, there's no way she would be chill with Brittany if that happened. And they seemed so chill on social media. Not that I was like following intently, but I was seeing people talk about them and they seemed chill. They seemed a little less chill at the reunion. I do wonder how much of like their social media is policed by production, because if Danielle and Brittany show any kind of animosity toward each other on social media, it does basically spoil exactly what happens. So I wonder if they were told explicitly, you cannot seem like you don't like each other. Because basically our entire season is building onto this cliffhanger that will be 100% spoiled if you two have any kind of hint of falling out. Um, but so maybe that's part of what was happening. But I thought their reunion interaction was very funny. Because I think Brittany was 100% correct when she was like, "Listen, we knew each other for 3 hours for reindeer games." But I also think Danielle was 100% correct when she was like, "Yeah, we're chill, but I'm not working with you again." um, like that's so fair. I mean, Brittany has not done herself favors. Like, okay, again, I love Brittany. Love Brittany. So this might sound weird. I don't know. It would probably sound weird to Traitors fans because they love to hate Danielle. But if I found myself on a season of a show and Brittany is there and Danielle is there, and I am choosing who would I like to work with, it's not even remotely a question for me. I will 1000% work with Danielle over Brittany. Brittany is unfortunately not a very reliable ally. I love Brittany. I do. I would be very sad to not work with Brittany if I was not working with Brittany because I think she's hilarious and I want to be best friends with her. But I would so much rather work with Danielle as an ally. Um, here's the thing too. I don't like. I do think Brittany is a very strategic player. I think she's a very smart player. I think that she is clearly just prone to panicking in moments of like stress, of like time crunch stress. Um, I mean, she I think did pretty well to make it as far as she did. Um, so I don't think we can really like knock Brittany for her performance for the most part up until that mistake. You know, she makes an awful mistake in that one moment, but prior to that, doing pretty well and ultimately came pretty close to winning the game. I mean, again, imagine she doesn't make that mistake. They win the coin flip or whatever the tiebreaker is, and then they go on to win the game. I mean, that's a brilliantly played game by Brittany, right? Able to clock that Danielle is a traitor, uses that fact to get close to Danielle. I would call it manipulation. Um, Doing a bit of guilt tripping, doing a bit of like, hey, we're best friends. I trust you so much. Getting Danielle to make a suboptimal recruitment play to get you on board rather than somebody more useful. And then going on to win the game as a traitor with Danielle. I mean, that's a really, really well played game. And she came really close to doing it. Just one big mistake right there and the whole thing crumbles. And that's how these games sometimes go. Um, and I mean, similarly, again with Danielle, where like, I mean, what a performance by Danielle. She comes in with a big reputation. Now, I don't think that most people um knew about Danielle's reputation. And I think this was huge for her success. I really do. I'm going to give Danielle probably way more props than most people in the Traitors fan base seem to. But what I will say is that um, she definitely benefited from not having the reputation of, you know, a Parvati or Rob or Dan or Tony. Like, these other people who played a little more recently and have a more devious reputation. I think most people didn't really seem to know or remember Danielle's reputation, which is part of what allows her to go in and play this role of like scared, uh, you know, scared player, um, which apparently was very effective, except for with with people who knew her. Um, so that's cool. And definitely like an advantage that she had. But what it did do is that there were still a couple of people that did know her, and those were huge liabilities. Um, so that was rough. Uh, Ultimately, though, she faces what I found to be the most contentious and self-destructive set of traitors I've ever seen. Um, the fact that by what was it, like round 2 or 3, they were already turning on each other. And throughout most of the season, there's constant infighting and sabotage amongst the traitors themselves. That is an incredibly difficult thing to navigate. That should tank all the traitors. Being a traitor on the traitors is like a prisoner's dilemma. And this is where I think the game works its best structurally and entertainment wise. Um, Again, traitors infighting is like the lifeblood of this show. The show is so much more interesting when it's traitor on traitor violence. But it shouldn't happen. It's bad play. Generally, it's just bad play for traitor on traitor violence. The traitors should just work together. They are so incredibly powerful if they actually just work together. If you put a group of traitors who all got along and wanted to get to the end together, they would steamroll the traitors like no other steamroll you've ever seen in another show. More so than the committee on Big Brother 22. It would be impossible to counteract them. It'd be very, very powerful. What happens is, and I think this is intentional, I would hope this is intentional, that they cast people who they do not think will like each other or work well together. Because then you get people like, I don't want to stick my neck out to protect this person. People are always worried about like, oh, well, we can't all be on the same page. But like, think about it, especially if you're metagaming. You never look at a group of people who are voting together and think they're all traitors. You think one of them must be a traitor, right? So if you're able to get like a voting block together, with 3 people working their own relationships, pulling together some kind of voting block, you can just steamroll that game like no other. Just immediately take out anybody smart enough to figure you out, and then just crush. On the flip side of things, if you are like the only person to betray and you do a calculated strike at your fellow traitors, you can succeed and come away with the solo win. But if you get caught, or if the other traitor also decides to do it, you all get screwed. It's pure prisoner's dilemma. And so the show relies on the fact that somebody's always going to betray. And that is way more entertaining. So, Boston Rob coming out of the gate, going after Bob, screws over Danielle massively. Danielle, I think, makes a mistake here. One of her bigger mistakes in the game. Does not read Carolyn correctly. Thinks that Carolyn is more loyal to Boston Rob than she actually is. Now, there is some validity to the idea that like even if Carolyn isn't on board with Boston Rob, very clearly Rob wants to work with Carolyn and will ice Danielle out at some point. So you can sort of understand why she ends up going after Carolyn, even though it was, I think, a mistake. From her perspective, she needs to weaken Rob. Rob is too powerful in the game right now. Maybe she can take out Carolyn. Ultimately, I think that was both a misread and poor judgment. I think the strategy was not super sound, and she misread both Carolyn and Carolyn's position in the game. I think that Rob actually would have been easier to take out at that point, and Carolyn would have been better to work with. Do I think they could have worked together long term? No, I really don't. I think whether Danielle starts the betrayal then or later, or if she tries to work with Carolyn all season long, I don't think Carolyn is sticking with Danielle. I don't think Danielle's sticking with Carolyn. The two of them were always destined to clash. But I still think that she miscalculated in going after Carolyn when she did, and I think the way she went about it was also pretty sloppy. But aside from that, she was already in this position. Losing Bob when she did was really bad for her. And now all of a sudden she has this like very contentious traitors turret, traitors on traitor and traitor violence. And that's a really, really tough place to be. They talked about it in the reunion that like she lasted more rounds as a traitor than most traitors have. I don't know that. I haven't watched all the seasons. I think they said she survived like 8 or 9 roundtables, which is like up there in terms of records for Traitors. Um, and I think that is made significantly more impressive given the fact that like there was traitor on traitor violence early on. Um, and throughout the season, there was traitor on traitor. That makes it way more difficult. Uh, so I think you have to give her massive kudos for that. You easily have to say she was the best traitor of the season. Like to say that she's the worst traitor you've ever seen is wild, a wild take on a season where Boston Rob and Carolyn and Bob exist because Danielle very clearly in the same game outplayed all of them. um, and it's like I think the only you could say that like maybe she didn't outplay Bob, but she specifically outplayed Boston Rob and Carolyn. She like went head to head against both of them and won. Um, I do think Carolyn was a good trade. I mean, I think Carolyn was great at like hiding that she was a traitor very clearly. What Carolyn seemed to lack was social connections to make any like Carolyn was great at the hiding part of being a traitor. What she was not great at was like the other stuff. Meaning she didn't have the social capital to make moves or have agency both with the faithfuls and with the traitors. She couldn't get the kills in that she wanted in the traitor turret, and she couldn't make votes happen at the round table. And those are both very important things, arguably more important than not being suspicious. Um, so that's where she's, I think, fell short. I think the biggest thing for me, for Carolyn, and this is part of why she's such a good character, but also part of why I think she has struggled. And here's the thing too, I don't want people to get this misconstrued. I'm a huge Carolyn fan. I was a huge Carolyn defender on her season of Survivor. I don't remember which number it was. I really felt like she was undercredited at the end of her season of Survivor. I really do think, and I really appreciate that she like stands up for who she is and is like just genuine about like this is who I am, and people do disrespect her. I think that she did a better job on Survivor than people gave her credit for. But what I will say is that I think one of her fundamental flaws and weaknesses in the game, apart from I think a little bit of like self doubt and insecurity, which I think screwed her on the chess challenge, where she was like, "Oh well, nobody listens to me," and then it was like, "Oh well, who would say that?" Carolyn would say that she's the one that is not listened to, which is like it's tough, right? This is where things really start to spiral with like the way our society works. But like she isn't well respected or listened to as much as other people. We see that in the show. We see that on Survivor. Um, but then if she allows that to like internalize, now there's like an insecurity there that almost makes it worse. And so like the burden is on her to overcome the situation she's put in. And if she does that successfully and comes out as a strong person that's not insecure, she'll get hate for that. There's no winning. But in a game like this, it definitely hinders her. And I think the other side of this is she is too honest. There were many times I felt that she should have just played ball. Like, I think basically, especially in the Traitors turret, you've got two choices. You can fight hard to get what you want, or you can capitulate and say, I'm 100% supportive of what you want to do. I'm completely with you. I think those are your two best options. Either fight hard for what you want and get it and lose some social capital, but get a move made, or sacrifice the move, sacrifice social capital, get the move, or sacrifice the move, get the social capital of being like, hey, I'm with you, trust me, we've got this, right? Carolyn, I think, nearly every time took the middle ground of kind of sacrificing both. She didn't get the move she wanted, nor did she really ever like fight too hard for it, from what we saw at least. But also always made it clear that she wasn't happy about it. And anytime Danielle was like, let's put the past behind us, she was like, no. Which is, you know, not the way. So, you know, I think, and quite frankly, even like, I thought Boston Rob did a fairly decent job as well, for the position he was in. I think he was always destined to lose, coming in as one of three players who you have to assume one of them are traitors. And coming into the traitors turret late as well, as like a fourth person, was pretty bad. And he also came into a traitors turret full of people who did not want him there. Given all of that, he did a really decent job, I would say, but certainly made mistakes along the way as well. I do think he would have needed to take out Bob at some point, Bob or Danielle. And going early was not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but the thing is that like he was too obvious about it. I talked about this on the Free Agents podcast, but it was the right idea with the wrong execution. He knew that the right thing to do would be to set the vote up prior to the roundtable and then make it happen without needing to chime in himself. But I think because he felt such a rush to get it in, he ended up bailing on that plan and pushing it himself. And that just wasn't the way. I think that he had the social capital to make this happen without needing to push himself. And he just needed to be patient and wait for the right opportunity. And he didn't have the patience. And I think that he overestimated how quickly Bob would move against him. So I think as soon as he makes that move, he puts himself, there's like a ticking clock basically on him. And honestly, I think that after that, once you take out Bob, once you've made that move, I think he needs to take out Danielle next. I think he needs to take out Carolyn next. I think he needs to just decimate the rest of the traitors and then start recruiting allies. I don't think you can take this half measure of like, okay, I did that move, but we're still working together. I think that was a mistake. All right. That's many of my thoughts. Let me know if you have any questions. Wasn't sure how to feel about Dylan on day one, but you have to admit he impressed you. Yeah, I mean, I think Dylan easily played the best faithful game I've seen. And to be fair to Dylan, I would say also, if he hadn't been pushed on by Brittany so hard in the previous roundtable, I do think he would have been more willing to cut more people at the end. I think the reason Dylan chooses green at the end, I would assume at least, is because if it goes red, there's too big a chance he gets voted out. Well, okay. Here's what I think happened. Here's my theory. They were all convinced they were voting Danielle. Dylan was hoping that Brittany. Dylan was hoping that Brittany would come back and say that Gabby was a traitor, because if she did that, then he had already done the work to make sure that they then vote both Brittany and Gabby out. If they vote both Brittany and Gabby out, then he and Ivor can vote out Dolores and be the final two. Easy. He wins the game in a duo if that happens. Unfortunately for him, Brittany comes back and says that Gabby is faithful. That's frustrating for him. He doesn't think Gabby is a traitor. He thinks Brittany is a traitor. But now Gabby's been cleared. And so he's thinking, damn it, how do I get Gabby voted out? Oh, wait a minute. They could both be traitors. He floats that idea, but it doesn't stick because nobody really believes it, right? Then Brittany starts coming for him. And he's put on the defensive. Dylan, for as I think for as good as he played for much of the season, not great in confrontation. And so Brittany starts coming for him. There's a conversation with Dolores and him and Gabby where Dolores is saying, "You'd better not vote me out." So what's happening here is Brittany tries to take the tactic, and it's a good one, of saying, you can't trust Dylan to not vote you out, because I think that's what he would have done. But because Brittany calls it out, now Gabby and Dolores are making him swear, you'd better, once we get Brittany out, you'd better not go for another vote. You'd better let us all win. And he's having to now promise, I promise I will do that. I promise I will, once we get Brittany out, we'll be good. And he's having to promise that because if he doesn't, they might just vote him out, even though they know Brittany's a traitor. They might vote him out first and then Brittany, right? So he's having to make that, he's basically backed into a corner, having to promise, I will not vote the two of you out if you vote with me on Brittany. So they vote out Brittany and they get to the fire. And if he throws red, Dolores and Gabby are voting him, right? So he's forced to go green. That's my theory based on what little we were able to see in terms of like what we were shown and what happened and the little conversations and bits that we saw. Have it on a podcast on Neta's Traitors Canada game. I think I did a little bit of I think I did a little stream on that season, but yeah. So I mean, I think good stuff from Dylan, but with the caveat of a lot of what I would credit Dylan for is things that you can imply from what he's saying in confessionals, but aren't necessarily explicitly stated. So it's possible that this interpretation is over crediting Dylan, given that they don't actually show what actually was, happening, nor do they ever really, which is frustrating because I think that like if Dylan had been buddying up to Traitors and had been doing all of this stuff, I think it would have been way more interesting to hear him be able to talk about that and tell us that was what he was doing. Any Big Brother players I'd like to see in future seasons, or as this season made me not want to see more of those players. Listen, I'm happy to see any players go on if they want to go on. Get paid, get on a really popular show, hopefully do well. Again, just be wary that that they might edit you in a certain way. How do I feel about Derek's game? That's a good question. I'm not sure what to think about Derek's game because, like, what was Derek doing there? There's a couple things about Derek. One, the way that he comes in, again, as one of 3 bonus players, you're always doomed. Like that's just a really bad spot to be put in. Um, you're one of three bonus players. You're one of three players with a big reputation being brought in. One of you is like metagame screws you. One of you is definitely a traitor. Uh, so that's a bad place to be. What that does is incentivizes you to suss out the traitor amongst the three of you as soon as possible so that one of them will be outed as a traitor and then you won't be voted out because it's like, okay, we got the traitor amongst the three. The problem for Derek is that he just got beat by Rob, right? Like Rob just had more social capital than him, and he couldn't compete with. And Rob has an advantage as a trader because he has the support of his fellow traders to some degree. Now I say that, but Rob didn't actually have the support of his fellow traders, so you know maybe he didn't have the advantage. Um, but but at the end of the day, Rob just had a better had more pull. Um, yeah, Derek thought he had Dylan, but Rob had Dylan. Um, what are you gonna do? Uh, I think that I think he had generally the right idea, but it's the sort of thing. It's similar to Dan, where it's just like you're not gonna win. But you're not gonna be Derek Levasseur and come on and win, especially as a faithful. Um, in fact, what I would say is, I mean, here's the thing: the show might fizzle out, but I think players like Dan and Derek and in like Boston Rob, I think those players would have a better shot at winning, like 5 seasons from now, with like a more developed meta. I say that they would have also had a better shot at winning 2 seasons ago, in the first season when they were non-reality people and it was a new show and there wasn't any meta yet. That also would have been better for them. But season 3, season 2, season 3, season 4, these are going to be bad seasons for players with big reputations, just straight up. Traders All Stars. I feel like there's just so many options that they have to make the show more fun, like structurally. But again, I can complain about it all I want. It's doing great. Ratings are great. Oh, I guess the other thing I'll say, I've sort of mentioned this already, but I think the big topic of season 3 of The Traitors is the wild amount of hate that Danielle got. Not just the criticism of her strategic play, which I think was, given the outcome, relatively unfounded. I think there are certainly things to criticize. I think I already have. But I think the amount of criticism was wildly overblown. The severity of it. But it went way beyond that as well. In terms of the hate that she was getting about her looks, her mannerisms, her behavior, her willingness to swear on her family. Like all of a sudden, we are in the year 2025, people. like Are we really upset that she swore on her family? Is that real? um yeah, people are upset about her theatrics. Like, now this, as Shakespeare points out, this is what I will say. I do think that there is some justified criticism about the relationship that she had with Carolyn. I do think that um, there were times where I personally was like, Danielle, come on. But I do not think that those times warranted the amount of hate that she received. And you know, it is not lost on me, nor should it be lost on anybody else watching this, that this is Danielle Reyes, who had a similar amount of backlash from her cast and from fans at times 20 years ago. Danielle Reyes, a black woman who dominated a season of Big Brother using tactics that were deemed, not fair, inexcusable. There was a lot of talk at that time that she's a mother and she's doing these things. And she is just she is like the classic example of, in Big Brother, of a black woman who strategically dominated and was given and was hated for it, right? And the season prior, as somebody's pointing out in the chat there, Dr. Will did much worse and was celebrated. And it's like in Big Brother, it feels like, okay, we've made so much progress since then, right? And yet here we are, 23 years later, and she's on a different show, and she's getting it's the exact same stuff. It's the exact same stuff from the audience, from her cast members. And given the current state of the world, I guess it shouldn't be that surprising, but but yeah, I think in general the Traitors fan base is like rough. And I think that's kind of true for a lot of shows. I think Survivor has gotten better about this. But like, I mean, I talk about it all the time, but like live feeds are just so valuable because like people will watch an edited show and form such strong opinions on people. And just go in on them. And on Big Brother, you also form strong opinions, but they're based on the live feeds. And the live feeds can help counteract some of the edits. And like even with the live feeds, like I would be willing to, like, a lot of a lot of Big Brother players I've talked to um have in general appreciated that the live feeds exist. Now, different people have different experiences with live feeds. If you got in trouble for saying slurs on the live feeds, you probably don't like live feeds. Um, but if you are, say, Taylor, and you were getting in the midst of getting a bad edit when the opinion on the of you on the live feeds helped shift the editors into a different direction, you're gonna have a different opinion on the live feeds. Um, but the thing about the live feeds is that it's this added layer of protection of like more truth, so that even if somebody gets like a bad edit, it's still massively influential, but there is still like at least some kind of record out there. Um, and it's harder to ignore because a lot of what people like to do is they get their narrative from the edit and then they just want to ignore anything else that counters that narrative. Um, and it's easy to do when like the only thing that counters the narrative is the person themselves in interviews saying this isn't true. Like, oh well, I don't like them anyway. They're lying. Um, but if it's like, oh well, here's like official record. Here were here's what happened on the live feeds. All of a sudden the burden isn't quite as heavy on the person themselves to defend themselves. Um, okay, so I actually wasn't aware of this. What is the cheating scandal? Because so they mentioned this in the reunion, I think, about like claims that Danielle told Brittany she was a traitor, which Danielle denies. And for the record as well, um, knowing these people probably much much better than most Traitors viewers, having watched them on their seasons, having watched them on live feeds, having spoken to them myself. Um, there's no way Danielle told Brittany she was a traitor. Danielle famously, and I actually, I think she used this in her defense to some degree. Uh, Danielle gets screwed over in Big Brother All Stars because she is somebody that did not break NDA and pregame. Um, Famously, Jason Guy, her original partner in season 3, was invited to play All Stars. He declined. He asked Danielle if she was playing. She told him no. Um, she is, and you know, I guess you could probably say like maybe she learned from that and decided to play differently, but she definitely is not the kind of person who is like going to, I think, be willing to like go outside the rules. Um, uh, but yeah, like somebody said up here, yeah, we all thought Janelle knew Dan was a traitor. Wasn't because he told her. It's just because it's obvious to people who know them. Yeah. Um, Especially given that like Danielle was so clearly being a different person, and Brittany was the only person who, one of the few people who like actually knew Danielle outside of the game. So like, I mean, you could say that by Danielle playing a character, she was basically telling Brittany that she was a traitor because Brittany was the only person who knew that that was different. Um, but I don't think that's like, I don't think that's intentional because I don't think she was intentionally trying to let Brittany know she was a traitor, especially when they still weren't on good terms. And B, I also don't think it's like against the rules at all. Uh, No, they're not close friends, but Brittany has specifically played a game with Danielle before, right? Um, that's why, like, it's part of why all of the fans were like, "Oh, Danielle's acting is so obvious." Because if you know her in confessional, or if you know her from before the show, then you know that what she's doing is in some part an act. But if you've only ever known her as the person that's shaking and nervous, that's much harder to see through. I mean, it's the same thing with Carolyn, except it wasn't an act with Carolyn, right? Like it would be very easy to see some of Carolyn's mannerisms and think, "Oh, she's nervous. She must be guilty." But if that's all you ever see from Carolyn, then you might start to realize, "Oh, that's just how Carolyn is. She's not necessarily nervous or feeling guilty. Those are just her mannerisms." Um, so it sounds like what happened for most people is that they just saw Danielle's shaking as part of her mannerisms. Um, and I think that's really clever in most circumstances. But if there are some people that know you, it can be a giveaway. Um, it's on a very small scale. When I played like the game of Sequester years ago now, I was playing with some people who knew me and many people who didn't, and I had to, depending on like the room I was in, slightly change how I approached conversations. Um, I started in a room with people who didn't know me, and I was able to like play up this more kind of like friendly, innocent vibe. But anytime I got into a room with one of the people I pre-gamed with or people who knew me from podcasting, um, I was more like, a little bit more like me as a like, oh, I'm a strategist. And that was very funny because there was a moment when I played that game where I was in a room with somebody I'd pre-gamed with but didn't know who I was, and I had pre-gamed like friendly Taran. Like, hey, we're both cat owners. Like I'm so nervous. And then also with somebody who knew me from podcasting. Um and it was a very funny situation because it was like I was having to like walk this line of two different like versions of myself, and I just wanted to get out of that room as soon as possible. But if you're playing a whole like, you know, that was like an 8-hour game, I think it's impossible to ride that line over days in person. So you just have to pick one and ride with it. And Danielle rode with what she went with, which worked with most people, but with some it didn't. But again, like there wasn't a lot of incentive. I think it's the right call because there's not a lot of incentive for Brittany to go against Danielle. In the same way that there wasn't a lot of incentive for Janelle to go against Dan, but you know, sometimes, sometimes. I mean that's another one too. Like Janelle going against Dan as hard as she did, so wild, so wild. Screwed them both. Um, in the same way that like Rob going after survivors or letting survivors get voted out, like it's such a simple concept. You need your allies as much as possible. It doesn't matter whether or not they're traitors. In fact, if you think you know that they're a traitor, that's good for you. That's amazing. Work with them. They will protect you from murders. Work with them. You will have numbers to survive roundtables. Work with them. You might be recruited later on. And if you're not, you can vote them out because you know they're a traitor. Anyway. Any other questions before we wrap up here? Well, here's the thing. I do get Derek not working with Boston Rob. Because A, Boston Rob is not a person you can trust if you're Derek. B, there's too much heat on the trio specifically of them. And as a faithful, you and C, like Derek just didn't have enough social capital otherwise. So I do think he needed to make a play. It just needed to land on his first try. It needed to land with West still in the game before he could get killed. Have I watched Extracted? No. What's Extracted? Groundbreaking survival competition. Contestants are not in charge of their destiny. Contestants face extreme conditions in wilderness while their families watch via live feed and can decide their fate by negotiating to send essential lifelines or by pressing the extract button, moving their family from the competition. Is it good? I'm not going to lie. That description does not sound good. But people seem to like it. That's interesting. Do I agree with Will's statement that people venturing on to other shows hurts them overall as they typically don't do as good as they did on Big Brother? No, I don't agree. I mean, it depends. It depends on what you mean by hurt. Going on the Traitors and being a big character on the Traitors, regardless of like your reputation, is going to be good for you most of the time. Even somebody like Dan, who has an immaculate reputation in Big Brother, comes onto the Traitors and takes a big hit. Big Brother fans are still all aboard the Dan train. They don't really care what happened on the Traitors. Traitors fans think that Dan sucked, but that doesn't really matter. They still know who Dan is, and they otherwise wouldn't have. So, if Dan wanted to do something else, he now has a bigger platform because he's reached more people from the Traitors. And if things go well for you, all the better. But if all you care about is your reputation, then yeah, it could go poorly. And, obviously Will is one of those people. I don't think all he cares about his reputation, but he obviously cares a lot about his reputation. He basically plays the games in a way that specifically is meant to defend his reputation. And so it's like every time Will goes on a show, it's just an opportunity to lose that reputation. And, I don't want to spoil Dondi. Anyway. I think that's about what we've got. Fun little trader stream. Hope you enjoyed it. If you're watching this on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this format as well. Just a little bit of traders talk. I might do something similar for Deal or No Deal Island. I feel like there's less to talk about with that show, but I feel like Deal or No Deal Island is a show where I enjoy like 15 minutes of every episode. And The Traitors is a show that I enjoy like 30 minutes of every episode. And then Survivor is a show where I enjoy like most of the episode except for Tribal. Like there's different levels, you know what I mean? And Big Brother is a show where it's all over the place. Who knows? But at least the live feeds are good. I've not seen David play Australian Survivor, but I love him on Deal or No. Watching David on Deal or No Deal Island is the closest I've come to wanting to watch Survivor Australia since they announced that there were going to be a bunch of American players on the next season. Because I'm definitely curious to watch David play Survivor. All right. Anyway, that's what we got. Thanks again for hanging out. I will maybe be back. I'm not sure if there's going to be a Blood on the Clock Tower game this weekend, but there's probably going to be some kind of Goose Goose Duck. Oh yeah, I forgot Will Neff loves Survivor and does those watch parties. Why the hesitation to watch Australian Survivor? I've watched it before. It's just a lot of episodes, a lot of really long episodes. And I've personally found that like it really tends to get sloggy. But I've also like not seen some of the better seasons that people have liked. Like I watched the first two of the when it got revived, basically, and I thought it was very good at first, but then kind of really slowed down. And it also doesn't help that like a large part of watching reality TV for me at this point is like getting to talk about it and be part of discussion, and there's just not as much around Australian Survivor. So there's like less, especially if I'm not watching it live, which is really hard to do because a lot of times it's during a Big Brother season. There's so many episodes, so lots of different little reasons, but no big ones. But anyway, that's what we got. Thanks again for hanging out. Make sure you check out the Tastemakers if you want my opinion on scripted things. Wheel of Time is coming soon. We're gonna be doing some Wheel of Time recaps if you want to check out those. And yeah, that's it. Thanks, and I will see all of you next time.